No. So that I can finish the essay next year.
But you also have to push up.
We'll just create a phrase like I was okay, I don't know what the phrase is.
I had to
Getting the
because it looks like it was the right family. So
figure out how to get
I'm already forgetting.
well, yeah,
I would for the summer to experience become but then
I have one that Oceania provided for her students. Yeah, I see it.
I'm doing the good work. Thank you for my products. Wait, those are sick. These are beautiful. Yeah, to just like get
Right.
I'm sure it'll be so accurate. Kind of are you guys facing the something comparative like the Pohnpeian and Austronesian language that has lots of content.
Which one should work better?
We did. That's wonderful. It's a program together.
Mine too, I also put the definitions from mentioned two different ways I can do it. That's okay. That's why I'm wondering what this is.
That's an Amy.
Maybe
This needs to be all about it. Yes, you can use it. Like there's time on what's
I love.
I say you're the most amazing person I know.
Thank you.
Is
that the opposite?
Thank you for
Saying.
I'm gonna make it.
I think it's
Just right then, I think.
I wanted to get it done with
Now we don't know.
Yeah, are you gonna do the? I'll do like the.
Yes, Wednesday. Yeah. It's lecture plan for 150. The whole day. They actually did they got every sound except S. The linguistics table.
I get mine today. I thought I have the shorter time block because I have a 5-day class.
Okay,
And I thought I made it enough shorter than last year because they all finished it like early last year. So I just got a couple questions and I did not. A lot of them are still at the end, so I probably have to curve that for that reason. I like my.
Yeah, I had a quiz for things like a unit. I'm not doing midterms because I don't like the idea, but
No, it's Ellie.
right, yeah.
Damn,
I should do that.
Yeah.
What's your GA, by the way? I'm a
Yeah.
research
So it's like.
but I'm getting paid. It was all of that stuff.
Files and
Thanks for coming to our second ISR Biocultural Initiative seminar of the the spring semester. So just a reminder, this is a collaboration with Institute for Sustainability and Resilience. We do curriculum and research related to sustainability and resilience across campus. And we are super excited to now be working with the Biocultural Initiative of the Pacific, who are hosting the seminar series. And we have 6 speakers throughout the semester, every other week on Wednesdays, always at lunch. So today's speaker is Gary Holton and Tamara Tickton, one of the Biocultural Initiative leadership team and a professor in the Department of Life Sciences, among many other talents. I'm going to introduce Gary. Thanks, Tamara. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, we're so excited. So many people came out today. It's great. For those of you who were here a couple of weeks ago, we had a little bit of an overview of what biocultural is and some of the ways that it plays out in our work. But a big gap in that was that we were missing our star linguist. And as you might remember from last time, a lot of biocultural work centers at the interface of the interconnections between biodiversity and culture and language. And so Gary Holton is a professor in the linguistics department here at UH. And from what I understand, he's very famous in his field. It's true, I was told by other linguists. As a documentary linguist, Gary Holton's work focuses on the documentation, description, and maintenance of indigenous languages and associated knowledge systems, including especially non-Austronesian languages of Eastern Indonesia and the Dene languages of Alaska. Most of these languages have been marginalized by ongoing forces of globalization, and their systematic documentation supports language continuity and vitality while also contributing to understanding of the diversity of human language structures. And we kind of had to twist Gary's arm a little to convince him to talk today. And something you might want to know is that Gary lives kind of like in an old banana farm. And so one day he brought in bananas and we're like, Gary, you got to give a talk. And he's like, what can I talk about? We're like, bananas. And he was like, yeah, I can give a whole talk on bananas. So we're really excited to hear it. So with that, thank you, Gary.
You have to thank or blame a couple of people, Amy for the Kuahu activity, which made me realize how much I do feel connected to bananas personally, and Kelsey for basically putting me on the schedule to talk about bananas. So now I have to talk about bananas. Can I talk about bananas for an hour? It turns out I could probably talk about bananas for the rest of the term. I'm not going to keep you here that long, but wow, there's a lot to talk about with bananas, as I'm finding out. And thank you also to Dr. Kavika for sharing his banana knowledge with me. And I hope we can just continue this conversation around this subject, because there really is a lot more to discover. So without further ado, there's something else I wanted to say, but how much, that's what I wanted to ask. How much time do I have?
It technically goes till 2:30. So if you want to talk about bananas for an hour and 20 minutes, or we can have a discuson about bananas.
Get the hook out before then. By 2, we should stop talking and get to like questions and things. So let's. There's a lot of slides here though, so fair warning. So why talk about bananas? Let me see if I can make my screen bigger, because I can't see very well. Is that? Yes. Okay. Okay. So bananas is really, it's the Pacific plant to my mind. I'm a little biased because of my background working in New Guinea region, but this is the place where, agriculture in the Pacific begins, 10,000 years ago in New Guinea with the domestication of bananas. So it seems like it's something that we need to think about in the Pacific. But there's biocultural reasons for thinking about bananas, I would argue, because bananas are these things that humans have to propagate. To put it in terminology that is well, I won't bother about that. So yeah, we have all this. We need interaction. We'll see this more as I go along. But we have this interaction between humans and bananas in order to propagate them, which means it's not just something that happens by itself. As a linguist, a non-botanist, right? I used to think of plants are just something that they just go out there and do their thing, right? Well, bananas are things where people interact with them. So it's a very biocultural sort of plant. There's a relationship there. From a linguistic point of view, and one thing I want to emphasize today, from a linguistic point of view, banana terminology is really stable as Austronesians, Oceanic speakers move across the Pacific until it isn't. And it just stops being stable and falls apart and gets very diverse. That is what I'm going to try to show you guys is a really interesting discontinuity that also may have correlates with the biocultural world as well. So, okay, so several reasons to think about bananas. What I want to do today, I'm going to talk a little bit about biology. I don't know much about biology, so I won't talk that much about that. I'll talk more about linguistics, try to do make some of the linguistics more accessible. Because I think it's really interesting and more people than linguists need to care about it. So I'm glad you're all here and I hope you won't regret coming afterward. Okay, so some sources. How do I make this go? I did it before. Oh, I touched this. Some sources, just to point out, in case you don't know about these, I'm sure the linguists in the room are familiar with these resources, but there are amazing resources out there if you're interested in learning about plants in general in the Pacific, not just bananas. There's these 3 resources that I highly recommend. This lexicon of Proto-Oceanic, of which there are 7 volumes. A 3rd volume is devoted to plants and covers all kinds of plant terminology. There's the Austronesian Comparative Dictionary, started by Bob Blust, and now maintained by Simon Greenhill. And there's the Polynesian Lexicon Project online, a long-standing project started back in the 60s and still maintained today. So those are great resources for finding terminology for plant names across the Pacific, and certainly things that help me in the work I'm going to present today. So, okay, now I'm going to try to say something about biology. But this is where my weakest point here. So I'm glad Kavika's right here to correct me on things. So banana biology, which does come into play here, because there is this 2 different, of this one genus, Musa, there are these 2 important sections that are very much differentiated linguistically and culturally as well, right? And these go by a couple of different names. We don't need to get into all of the synonyms, but I'm going to be referring to them as the Musa cultivars and the Kali Musa or fēʻī cultivars, right? So the Musas may be the ones we're most familiar with, the ones that are on the back table. The fēʻī may be ones we're less familiar with here. So yeah, fruit develops without fertilization, making seedless, take edible and grain of salt, because actually both forms are edible. You can eat seedless bananas, and indeed, well, there's been kind of a boom in the popular health world lately about eating seeded bananas, right? So we'll probably see a new recommendation from RFK Jr. about seeded bananas. And which is great. Maybe we'll have more seeded bananas propagating. But anyway, so take that edible thing. It's not, I use that loosely, right? But the things we think of as edible bananas tend not to be those, right? So yeah, so we have this parthenocopy that arises naturally amongst certain species, right? But then we can hybridize and propagate that via human means as well, right? So parthenocopy, right? That's the cognate in the Parthenon. I love that, right? So the temple of the Virgin of Athena, right? So anyway, don't get hung up on Greek, but okay, so we have this division into different genomes, the A and B genomes referring to these Acuminata and Valdiciana varieties that then give birth to most of the hybrids that we know and love today. But then there's this other thing, Kali Musa, right? This other section, which is its own thing, that comprises what I'm going to be calling mostly today fēʻī, but you'll see in the literature fēhi or sometimes fēki, F-E-K-I, the term coming from the Tahitian, right? We'll see that in a bit, right? Okay, so we have these different types of bananas. We can hybridize them in different ways, and that's where you get this terminology that you've probably seen with the AA and the AB and the AAA, and so we got, we can form diploids and then form triploids that are going to be sterile, and we get AAA forms, so multiple hybridization of Acuminata varieties, and that's, you're going to get in this category things like your standard Williams bananas and your Cuban reds and things like that. And you also get ABB sort of hybrids where you, with more of the Bisiana input, you get things like your ice cream bananas and things like that. But then what's important for us here today are these AAB hybrids, the so-called Pacific plantains, right? And that's pictured here in these, these are kind of fuzzy. But in this picture from Pohnpeian of a cultivar that goes by the name Mangat. But these, as we'll see, these AAB genome is across the Pacific and forms the Oceanic banana in concert with the fēʻī, right? Okay. Again, the real take home here, and what really matters for us today, is the fact that these are propagated primarily by human interaction, right? It takes humans to do this. Bananas didn't just go across the Pacific, carried by birds or whatever, right? Brought by people and needed tending by people. Okay, so yeah, human introduction. Can you guys read that? Guess it's just my eyes. Yeah, so human introduction. So all bananas east of the Solomon Islands are human introductions, right? So bananas arise naturally and hybridize naturally in New Guinea, in the Solomons, but anywhere further east, that's all human introduction, right? So we get these two cultivars that show up, right? The fēʻī didn't seem to spread anywhere west beyond Halmahera, which is kind of the boundary, kind of the east-westward boundary of Oceanic, island just off the west coast of New Guinea, but did spread everywhere in the Pacific, just about. Right? Pacific plantains, this AAB group did spread a little farther to the west, but mostly to the east. This is the Pacific banana type, right? Where are we now? Yeah, there's some maps, show you where those things originated from as wild species. And you can see that focus right there on the island of New Guinea, right? New Guinea is the center of diversity for the origination of bananas, right? Bananas were first domesticated in New Guinea 7,000 to 10,000 years ago. So New Guinea really is the cradle of agriculture in this sense. You got hundreds of cultivars documented there, including lots of diploid cultivars, not just triploids. and still many still maintained today, right? Okay, this seems out of place for that slide, but why do I have that slide there? Well, let's just roll with it because it's there. But it's really throwing me off because it's not supposed to be there. Yeah, hey, well, we'll skip it. And if it makes sense, I'm going to come back to it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that slide that I just tried to show that I didn't want to show is presaging the idea that there's a center of diversity of bananas in New Guinea. There's also a center of diversity and terminology there. So if we look at words for bananas across languages, we see many terms, right? And we can divide these terms into groups. You can think of these as cultivar groups of banana terms, if you will. And some work that was done by Mark Donahue and Tim Denham looked at 800 some varieties. I added to their database to fill out the rest of the Pacific because they were interested in looking at banana movement west of New Guinea and trying to show that bananas might move west from New Guinea, not out of India. And so their database was a little thin on the eastern side. So adding to that, we end up with 24 distinct sets of names with a huge amount of diversity centered on New Guinea. Now, you maybe can't see the diversity in this picture as well. So, so I did a little sections and applied an entropy measure to this, and you can actually see that you get this highest density in two areas of New Guinea. One is that area that I just showed, which is around the Cook Swamp area where early agriculture was documented. And the other is in the Bird's Head region of New Guinea. So these are the places where we get the highest diversity of banana terminology across different languages. So New Guinea then is an extremely diverse region in terms of banana plant diversity, but also in terms of banana name diversity. Now, there's another way you can think of diversity. I'm not going to focus on that today, but I'll just show a few examples. Another way you can think of diversity of bananas in the Pacific is just in the amount of names for bananas in single languages. Right? When we're looking here, we're thinking about names across languages. Right? When I look in any sort of area, there's a whole lot of different names, totally unrelated to each other. I'm not talking about the difference between, Tahitian say mea and Hawaiian say maia. This is like completely unrelated terms, right? But you can also think of how many terms, how many names for banana varieties they are. And as we look across languages of the Pacific, we see dozens of terms in just about any language that's well documented. The only limit seems to be, is there much documentation in the language? Right? But as soon as you start documenting banana terms, you can go from Galela and Halmahera across to Pohnpeian and Micronesia, across to Hawaiian, and everywhere you look, you get dozens and dozens of terms for banana varieties, right? So, for example, here's a list from Galela. In Galela, the cosmogony, the origin stories for agriculture in Galela says that the first plant was Obole okobasi, a wild variety that still exists today and is still known. And the second plant, I'm not talking bananas, first plant and second plant that existed in the world was this plant Obole omora, which is a Pacific plantain AAB hybrid, right? And the third plant was Obole sangate, right? So the whole origin story of agriculture in Galela is centered on bananas and still recognizes a wild variety that's still known in Galela today, right? So look at a whole classification. I wasn't going to talk about classifications. You can ask me about that later. Pohnpeian, similar sort of story, right? With many documented varieties, you can recognize names like ut, coming from Proto-Oceanic, Proto-Austronesian, if you will. But you also have lots of other sorts of generic names such as mangat, karat, and we'll see these coming back into play again. Similar story in Hawaiian with huge amount of diversity and lots of different species names. Yeah, so it's just enormous diversity if you wanted to look inside individual languages, which really gives you an idea of the richness and importance of bananas to Pacific peoples, right? But that's not what I'm going to focus on today, right? I'm interested in this kind of larger scale issue, not the smaller scale within languages. So I want to talk about linguistics. So I think it's important to point out that, you know, linguists are kind of known for being kind of arm wavers. We kind of like think about what's in people's heads and say, oh, wow, they must have this structure in their head, and they can conjugate verbs in a certain way, and they store this in a certain way. And it all feels a little bit kind of fuzzy-wuzzy, right? But there is a part of linguistics. There's a part of linguistics that I would argue is not very fuzzy and is very, very precise. And that's something called historical linguistics. And it goes back a couple hundred years to the 19th century. And it's developed a methodology that is really very robust. And I know this is going to be something that many of you have seen before, but I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just talking about this to make it clear that when I make claims about historical linguistics, I'm not just pulling rabbits out of hats, or I don't know what the right metaphor is, not just making things up, right? That there is a methodology behind here, right? I think sometimes historical linguistics is just presented as a kind of fait accompli. You just, here it is, and you got to believe it. I'm going to show you it's not that hard, and you don't have to just believe it. There's actually a method to it, right? And the reason for that method is an amazing thing, and it's this thing that the Grimms are complaining about here. It's that language changes, and it does so in a regular way. And that fact allows us to peer back into the past. If that wasn't the case, if language changed and it just did so because I felt like doing it, I couldn't use any methodology to peer back in the past. If language didn't change and it just stayed all the same, linguists would be out of business, right? There'd be, you know, we couldn't really do anything. But because of this fact that language changes, and everybody complains about it, right? Everybody's grandma has complained about how their grandkids are speaking in every single language of the world because language keeps changing, right? But what that change allows us to do is reconstruct what's going on in the past, because there's this variation and the change happens regularly. And that's the key piece. The change just doesn't happen willy-nilly. There's a regular process of change. We can see that change and then unwind it, right? So the process works something like, well, I'll get to that in a second. Just emphasizing this regular piece, right? We can see similarities all over the place. That's not linguistics, right? So I can see that Maori word for I happens to be really like the Greek word. Doesn't make Maori and Greek related, right? Because there's a whole bunch of other places where M's in Maori do not correspond to M's in Greek. So regular change or regular correspondence has to happen throughout the whole lexicon. It can't just be one old word happens to be similar, right? So we can always find similarities. That's not linguistics, right? That's not a method, right? So in fact, when you think about it, if language changes, over time, you wouldn't expect related languages to look similar. Those changes are making them look different. So what you actually expect is difference. You don't expect similarity. It's a little bit counterintuitive until you think about it, right? But as language changes, the languages should become different from each other. Related languages should not look the same, right? The further apart they are, all things considered equal, the further time goes on, they should look different, but we should be able to see what the correspondences are. So similarity in languages is not the same as relationship, right? Right, so I gave an example here, right? Hawaiian ihu, the nose, right? In Thailand, in Moken, the word is yong. Right, so totally related. I can show you that those two relate back into time, and are inherited from a proto-Malayo-Polynesian form ihung, but they sure don't look similar. Okay, so the comparative method is what allows us to do this this unwinding of the past. To historical linguists like the late Bob Bluss, the comparative method is historical linguistics, right? It's the core of what it does. And at the risk of throwing too much linguistics on you, we're almost at the end. I'll just throw one example here of kind of how this works. If you were comparing words in related languages, you might make a list of those words, something like this. You might cross out the ones that look weird, like, well, that doesn't fit. And maybe those are kind of one-off things, or maybe they're borrowing from another language. But then we look at the rest and we just try to add up what the correspondences are, right? If I look at the word for sea in there, the first one's got an H in it, and the rest of them have nothing where that H was, right? So I've got tahi and tai, right? So I've got a correspondence there of all of those sounds, right? If I look at that next form for fish, I've got ika and ita. So I've got a K and an okina, a K and okina. So I've got that pattern, right? So I go through the whole thing, right? And if we were taking a linguistics class, we'd make a list like this, and I get a whole list of correspondences. Little bookkeeping, right? Okay, I can do that. Kind of tally them up. Some of them there's more than one instance of, right? But I've got 4 unique ones in that set. Here's what the comparative method tells me. This is 19th century amazing insights into language. Each of those is a sound in the language that these 4 languages came from, right? I don't know what that sound was. I wasn't around back then, right? But I know there are 4 sounds, one corresponding to each of those, right? That much the comparative method gives us, and it's rock solid, right? That's like, there's like real science to that. I can know that there was some stage earlier in the history of these languages where these 4 sounds existed. And that first sound, it turned into H in Tongan, and it just disappeared in the other 3 languages. So I know something about history. Now, I don't know what that sound was. There's another stage I can go and say, oh, I think the first one was probably an H, and it's probably a good guess, right? Because there's an H and then nothing else. But I put a little asterisk here to kind of signal it's a guess. Yeah.
The S is only present in the Samoan, not present in the other. So how would you know that sound would be consistent in the other?
Oh, down here? Yeah, I mean, based on the data I have here, when I get down to this, well, I've already used up the other one. So I've already used my H and I've already used my okina. The only other one I've seen is, right? So if I'm making a list here, if I say the first one has to be H, second one has to be an okina, third one has to be K, when I get to the last one, I kind of want to choose between SH and an Okina. And I've already taken the H and the Okina.
Not the T though.
Yeah. No.
The T is
But-
prevalent in 3 of the 4.
Yeah, but again, this part, I'm going to argue here that this part is not really part of the comparative method. That's totally guesswork. Well, not totally, educated guesswork, right? And it's also going to depend on what data I have, right? I guess the point I want to make here is that we can't know exactly what sounds though that were being pronounced in the proto-language. What we can know is that there was a sound. Right? I can know that there were these 4 sounds. What they actually were, historical linguists will fight about and go to the floor about, right? So, but we can't really verify that. We can come up with theories about, oh, it's easier to change this sound to that sound and various things, right? But all of that aside, this part before is rock solid, right? That part we know that there were those 4 sounds and that they changed in a certain way, right? Once we get to here, we're back into linguistic hand waving a little bit because we're imagining something in the past, right? Okay. Okay, so that's the end of linguistic lesson. Thank you for bearing with me. But now you've all passed Historical Linguistics 101, and you can go start reconstructing languages. And that's where the interesting bit comes, right? Because if we can use this method and start reconstructing these languages, we can start looking at kind of what was going on in the past in various communities, right? So so we can start doing things like looking at where was this language spoken, and maybe even something a little bit about how long ago was it spoken, although there's some hand waving there. Linguists aren't very good at that, right? Although they'll make claims, the tools don't really give us good ideas of how to do that. So so we have proto-languages. I need to start moving into more data here. So so here's the exciting part, right? We can look at the vocabulary that we've reconstructed, and now we can start saying something about the culture, the environment, what was it like for those people, right? So we do all this mechanics of reconstructing. Now we can start looking at the meanings and what's going on. And the first thing we find out in regards to bananas is that we can reconstruct bananas all the way back. I'm going to say Taiwan. People are going to argue with me. But there's, if not Taiwan, then very close to Taiwan, right? So we have a form that we can reconstruct using that same method that I was showing, the comparative method. We can reconstruct this Proto-Austronesian term, punti, for banana. It goes all the way across much of the Austronesian world, right? So we can find reflexes. Again, these won't necessarily look like punti to the uninformed eye, right? Because they're sound changes, right? They're gonna maybe look like ut or something in Pohnpeian, right? But they'll still be inherited in that regular way, right? You can ask me later if you want to ask about whether this is reconstructed to Proto-Austronesian or to the next level down to Proto-Western Malayo-Polynesian. There's some argument there, but it's either up to the level of Proto-Austronesian in Taiwan or up to the level of Western Malayo-Polynesian, or of Malayo-Polynesian, who are the folks that left Taiwan. Remember, most of the Austronesians stayed in Taiwan. And then there is one branch of the family that left. Okay, so if you remember one slide from this entire talk, this is the one to kind of imprint on your mind, because that thing we reconstructed is punti and goes across all of the Austronesian world. It's on 800 different languages. Just stops when we get to the Central Pacific, and instead this other term mica shows up. So we have reflexes of punti all across much of Austronesia and much of Polynesia. This is just a map of just Polynesian languages and what reflexes you get. And most of them are reflexes of punti, but then you see all those blue dots just matching up with what we might call the Polynesian triangle. So you get these punti in the so-called outlier languages, and then you get replacement in Eastern Polynesia. And kind of curiously, if you superimpose one of those like traditional maps of the Polynesian triangle, right? Kind of the places where you get the mica kind of matches our kind of naive idea of what the Polynesian triangle is, and kind of overlooks this big part of Polynesia, which on most maps like this one is labeled Melanesia, right? It's because many of the Polynesian languages are spoken not in this triangle green stuff, but in this purple stuff, right? And those are precisely the languages that maintain this punti as a form. So we can't say that mica is a form in all of Polynesian languages. It's something that shows up in the Eastern languages. As many have pointed out, I think especially people like Pat Kirch, and this whole idea of an outlier really doesn't make sense, but I'll probably still keep using the term. I don't know why I can't do a talk on historical linguistics without using the word whence. There was kind of a whole phase in the Oceanic Linguistics Journal with papers with the whence title. I should probably stop doing that. But anyway, where does this come from? Where do you get mica, right? Because you go across this whole Austronesian world, you got this perfectly good term, punti, and you just completely abandon it with something unrelated. It just seems to appear out of nowhere. There's a few little clues, right? If you look in Maori, you can maybe find some traces of both the punti term, which is realized in Oceanic as futi, that's the reflex of it, and mica as well, right? Now there's, so you have Maikaika there, which is actually applied to several orchids, edible orchids with edible tubers, right? So maybe that's a good semantic shift, right? And you have this kind of curious sweet potato term. There's a variety of sweet potato that's kumara huti. Maybe, huti would be the reflex of futi in Maori, but there's also homophonous forms, the meaning to pluck or pick. It could be from that. You're kind of curious. Maybe that's around. There's some kind of intriguing evidence of a recent shift in Rapa Nui, right? On Cook's visit in 1774, the term for banana that was recorded was actually mica, or was actually futi. Although that's not known in Rapa Nui today. So maybe the term did go further than we think, right? Maybe it did get in and then was replaced more recently. Seems possible. But for whatever reason, we have this full replacement today in the Eastern Pacific of this punti to futi to now just to mica. So just like I was I was just telling you that languages don't just change willy-nilly. That seems to be what happened in Eastern Polynesian. They just came up with mica. Okay, so that's the Pacific plantains, right? That's the AAB bananas. I want to shift gears for a second and we're gonna have to shift gears and speed up and talk about fēʻī, right? Because arguably this is even a more important Pacific banana. So the fēʻī are really different bananas than certainly I've been familiar with. I've never seen a fēʻī face to face. So I've relied a lot on a recent paper here by Thompson et al. 2018 on fēʻī bananas. So much of what I say about fēʻī really stems from that work. Okay, so yeah, so we already said that fēʻī did not move west. Yeah, so here's the difference, right? That with these other bananas, which did move west, Austronesians knew about them before they came to New Guinea, right? We saw they were reconstructed in Taiwan, or at least Malayo-Polynesian, right? So the term came, banana technology came to the Austronesian world from where the Austronesians departed in Formosa, Taiwan, Philippines, right? Not true of fēʻī, right? Fēʻī did not move west. So Austronesians didn't find out about them until they get there. And they're like, whoa, we get to Solomon Islands, Bismarck Archipelago, and that area, kind of the proto-Oceanic times, Lapita times, if you will, and discover fēʻī bananas. This whole different variety of bananas, extremely nutritious, yeah, has many great qualities, and these get carried then across the Pacific along with those the punti variety bananas that gets renamed mica eventually, right? So we got this one kind of thing going on with the puntis that gets renamed as fica, and this other thing going on with the fēʻī that gets encountered when people get to near Oceania. Okay? And in some places, notably Tahiti and Micronesia, this becomes a dominant banana with many, many varieties. Tahiti is more than 20 named varieties of fēʻī cultivars. So become extremely important. So if we look at names, so we looked at names for the Pacific plantains varieties there. If we look at names for fēʻī, we get a similar sort of terminological diversity. I would argue even more terminological diversity. And if we, this is just names, if we try to group them into things that kind of share common origins, probably the most predominant is this Joraga term. This is a Proto-Oceanic reconstruction. So this is something Proto-Oceanic speakers in near Oceania knew about. This term, you can think of that as maybe the original Oceanic term for fēʻī bananas. But there's some other terms as well, and you see some color changes as you move east. In particular, this innovated Eastern Polynesian term, huetū, and the Tahitian innovation fēʻī. There's some other innovations like Micronesian has karat. Kind of look at which is more frequent. Again, Joraga is the most frequent one. Miscellaneous terms are concentrated primarily in that area right around near Oceania, the origin of fēʻīs. Right? That's where you expect the most diversity. Right? So I think this is just what I already said, right? Yeah, so yeah, I already alluded to the near Oceania as being the origin of banana domestication. Yeah. So there's, I guess, there's some argument in the literature as to whether this Joraga reconstruction for Proto-Oceanic really means fēʻī, right? In all of the reflexes, in all of the daughter languages where you find this, it does apply to fēʻī. We can't be certain that really was the term originally, but given that this area of near Oceania where Oceanic speakers were just getting together, is also the area of fēʻī domestication originally, it seems pretty likely that that was the term. Right? So we do have this an innovation at the level of Proto-Oceanic for this fēʻī banana term. But remember, this isn't like the innovation with mica, where we have the same bananas and a new term. These are people coming into near Oceania and encountering the fēʻī and then giving them the name Joraga. Right? So they didn't just come up with a name, change the name for something existing. They encountered a new thing, a new kind of banana, and gave the name Joraga. But it didn't stop there, because the innovation continues, as we saw on that map, right? There's other colors up there as well. So there's more terminological innovation as we move around the Pacific. And I think I already mentioned some of these names, right? So like huetū and fēʻī in Tahitian. You have Hawaiian cognate, hēʻī. If we had more time, I could talk more about fēʻī in Hawaii. I'm going to save that. If you want to ask me questions about that, you can. But what I want to point out here in the few minutes we have left is that this innovation that I've mentioned for both kinds of bananas, both the Pacific plantains, innovating from punti to mica, and the fēʻī bananas innovating from this form Joraga to something like huetū or fēʻī or whatever, that innovation should not be just assumed. Don't shrug your shoulders at it. That's not normal. That is weird, right? Because actually, most of the time, terminology is continued across the Pacific through Polynesian. Okay? So there's a few things that maybe don't continue as well, but or there are a few other instances of innovations. I listed a few here, but even then, those innovations that exist propagate all the way across Polynesia, right? So, for example, these terms for mana, once that's an innovative term, that's new in Oceanic, but it goes all the way across the Pacific once it's innovated, right? I won't go through all of those maps in the interest of time. In particular, as work of Paul Garrity pointed out, plant and animal names seem to be continued through Polynesian into the Eastern Polynesian area. Right? In fact, the only major plant name that is not continued into Eastern Polynesian is mica. Right? So, this shift from futi to mica, right? So it's really quite unusual to have this shift. It's not like we can just explain this away. It's like, well, that's just what people do, right? People did something different with bananas in terms of their naming of terms. Right? They didn't just continue a practice that they do for any old plant. Right? I mean, even this is a nice case that Garrity points out, even like with this term for owl, right? you have this Proto-Oceanic lulu. We don't have that in Hawaii, but you do find it in New Zealand. But as you go across Eastern Polynesia, it's instead transferred to mean seabird. There aren't any owls there, but there are seabirds, so the term gets used for that. But by the time people get to Aotearoa, becomes owl again. Meaning that idea of that original referent of what lulu meant persisted. That's how sticky these terms are, right? Like even for all these people using lulu to mean seabird, they still had an idea that it could be an owl too. And as soon as they arrive in New Zealand, it's an owl again. As soon as you start seeing owls again, you know the word, right? So that's how sticky these flora and fauna terms are. But in spite of that stickiness, didn't keep the banana terms, right? So where do these fēʻī bananas come from? And I got to speed things up here. So there's been a lot of different proposals. Kepler and Russ proposed that maybe birds brought them around. But it looks like more recent research, genetic work, shows that they came from the Solomon Islands, right? That the fēʻī in Marquesas and Tahiti can be traced directly to varieties that are in the Solomons, right? So this is a picture after their paper showing distribution paths of those varieties. Okay, so now I'm going to wrap up by saying something very controversial, right? So given that picture, we'll go back to that, just think about that picture for a second. Given that picture of how fēʻī bananas moved across the Pacific, that's very different from the way we think people moved across the Pacific in a traditional sort of view, right? The traditional sort of view is espoused by Moana, right? That if you know the Moana movie, right? People sit around for a while and they have to kind of get their voyaging back. This is known in archaeology as the long pause, right? You hang out for a while in the Central Pacific before settling the Eastern Pacific, right? And the problem with this sort of approach when we think about the bananas is that we've got this discontinuity in terminology. So if everybody's sitting around in the Central Pacific and they have these terms for bananas, what motivates a sudden departure from that terminology when all of the other terminology is being kept, all of your terminology for other different plants, right? And it fails to account for this break in fēʻī genetic diversity, right? That the Thompson et al. Paper points out, right? And I think another important point is that it really fails to take into account the importance of the so-called outliers, right? This other kind of forgotten piece of Polynesia, right? So here's where the controversial part gets. There's an alternative proposal put forward by Pila Wilson that suggests that East Polynesia was settled not from Fiji and Samoa after this long pause, but actually directly from the northern outliers. So in the area of Solomon Islands. So you may know Pila Wilson from his work with, he originally in the 70s worked on Polynesian grammar, I guess the Polynesian possessives. He got distracted by a little side project known as Hawaiian language revitalization movement, but he's recently returned to this idea of the possibility that there is a connection directly between East Polynesia and these outliers, right? So maybe some of you have seen some of this work that he's been publishing over the last 5-6 years, I guess. It's still fairly alternative, maybe not mainstream. And I would have to say, when I first read it, I was a little skeptical. From a linguistic point of view, there's some other things to think about. But when you think about it in the light of this claim about how fēʻī bananas are moving, suddenly there's a biocultural connection. We've got linguistic evidence that's a little bit sketchy, but then we've got this banana evidence too. It's hard not to see the connection to those because Wilson's arrow looks almost exactly like Thompson's fēʻī arrow, right? And this is an arrow that has nothing to do with bananas. This is an arrow that has just to do with linguistics, which subgroups the Eastern Polynesian languages along with those northern outlier languages over in the Solomons, and along with the Carolinian outliers, Nuku'oro, Kapingamarangi. So the two kind of match up together, and this is where maybe one explanation kind of helps the other. I won't go through the whole evidence for the northern outliers East Polynesian hypothesis, but just to say there's some intriguing things in there that are difficult to explain otherwise. This isn't just, so there's a lot of kind of, oddballs. So, I mean, I get emails every week about people telling me about, oh, this relation, they want to show me how one language is related to another and can I validate this? And there's definitely, I mean, it's right to be skeptical about this hypothesis, but it's not just, it's got some validity to it, right? It's methodologically sound. So still a minority view, but really the big limitation here is that we just don't have a lot of documentation from the northern outlier languages. These are languages with maybe a couple thousand speakers, many of them just a couple hundred speakers. I think there's one dictionary, one grammar description. So very little documentation of these languages. So it's very difficult to evaluate the linguistic hypothesis. And until the Thompsons et al. Work, very little banana documentation either. Right? So we're making assumptions about history, ignoring a lot of information about Polynesian languages that are spoken outside of the traditional triangle. Okay. Let's wrap things up here. Just kind of 3 points of summary. There's a big discontinuity in banana terms. I don't know why it's there, but it seems like it means something. And it contrasts with what's going on with the rest of the vocabulary. Right? It's unusual. There's a big discontinuity in bananas. In the same area, almost parallel, right? We draw almost the same lines, and that contrasts with what's happening with other flora and fauna. And we have this intriguing and maybe kind of off the wall, but intriguing nevertheless, hypothesis that there may be a connection directly from the northern outliers to the East Polynesia, and which would explain both linguistics and the bananas if it were true. So, so there does seem to be a possible pathway, and I figure out why not conclude by throwing out something controversial as a way of maybe encouraging people to pursue this idea. I think there's a lot more research to be done, both on the linguistic side and on the banana side. So, mahalo. Oh, that's good.
That's perfect. Thank you, Gary. That was so interesting. Do we have any questions in the room, and online if you have questions?
I got a burning one.
Yeah.
So when Polynesian or Oceanic cultivars are incorporated into the English language, they tend to follow either one of two routes. They pick a cognate and keep that, like taro and taro, or taro and taro, or they describe it like sweet potato or breadfruit. Where the heck does banana come from?
Oh, yeah. Most people think banana comes from Africa. The name, right? Yeah, so from, I think it is Wolof is.
So when did Musa go to Africa?
Early. So that transport, so that's in the Donahue and Denham 2009 paper, really documents the linguistics of this. So you get early spread from New Guinea. Yeah. So yeah, I can't remember the date it reaches West Africa, but it's surprisingly
So
early.
you can go from banana Fuji in the other direction. Fuji is you can go from banana to Fuji from that way too.
You can go back, yeah.
And you can deconstruct banana into.
So banana the plant is spreading west before there's even a puti.
Oh.
So bananas start spreading before the Austronesians. When the Austronesians leave Taiwan, bananas are already there. So bananas made it westward. They didn't make it eastward because they didn't have the Austronesians, didn't have any way to go east, right? So yeah, so there's pre-Austronesian dispersal. But yeah, there's lots of stories about why banana, there's people say it's similar to an Arabic term and the traders were Arabic. Why do we use banana instead of musa? Some people have argued there's a form muku that comes from New Guinea. Some people have argued that's actually the origin of musa. I don't think that's true, right? But
They call it banana or banana in Africa.
I don't know. I don't know Wolof.
Is it believed that they use the banana itself with the seeds, which are not easy to propagate, or do they bring cultivar pieces that they planted? Did they have? What is the hypothesis on how they got the plants there?
My take on that, I don't know, anybody else who has information, please jump in. My take is it was both, right? The people would have tried to do both. Seeds might work, they might not, but they're easy to take, easier than the keikis. So whereas obviously, if Thompson's right that they're coming from the Solomon Islands, that's a long trek, 5,000 kilometers or so, right? So you really need to package things well.
Fresh water.
Yeah.
The other thing is you were mentioning about the location of bananas. The bananas' origin would be the African continent or Madagascar or what?
No, it looks like it's New Guinea. Yeah, that's been pretty well documented in the last couple of decades.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was a belief of multiple origins, right? But it does seem to be that New Guinea is the origin. That's why I called it the Pacific plant.
Right.
Yeah. Oliver.
Yeah, a question just building off. So obviously bananas had reached Taiwan before Austronesians left out, but they would have encountered banana species when they interacted with peoples already in Papua New Guinea island of New Guinea, Solomon Islands. And they would have been encountering their terminology for bananas as well. I'm just trying to imagine, were they bringing bananas with them? Were they just recognizing this was the same plant? Were they very different? Is there any sort of discussion or like research onto that kind of interaction between language or culture groups and their particular relations to particular plants as they move down through these places?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and this gets into this whole idea that I think traces to Bob Blust, but got popularized by Jared Diamond in the so-called fast track of Austronesian migration, right? That as that migration happens across North New Guinea, you get very little influence in terminology, right? So that's where you get this idea that people were moving so quickly, they didn't have time to worry about, we don't want to know about your name for bananas. That said, they clearly picked up fēʻī bananas, right? So they were clearly picking up banana technology, but maybe not banana names. Now you do get in the language that has been around there longer, like the outlier languages, then you get a bunch of influence on terminology, but you don't see that in the rest of Oceanic languages. So I don't know. I remain agnostic about the fast track idea, but that is what's in the literature in terms of as the explanation. People were moving fast. They didn't take on the terminology. Yeah, Andy.
So would that be the explanation
if the Austronesians left to Taiwan with Punti, but then we see like in Eastern Indonesia, the form muku in Austronesian languages, is that because the banana was there earlier as were non-Austronesian people and the contact was just long enough that they borrowed it versus the fast track that you're talking about?
Yeah, so yeah, good question too. So Donahue and Denham, so Mark Donahue is a linguist who's collaborated with banana guy Tim Denham, and they've written several papers together. And their claim is that Eastern Indonesian term is actually a borrowing from Papuan, right? So it's that. So yes, bananas were there, but then the Eastern Indonesians, as they did with many things, right? There's a lot of whole substrata of non-Austronesian terminology there. So that's what they claim about Wupu.
Question online.
Oh,
Joseph says, is there any space for the theory that Mica or Mai'a may have been adopted from people already on one of the islands when Polynesians arrived?
and in near Oceania?
So can you clarify?
Mica doesn't show up until we get out to what we traditionally think of as being the previously uninhabited Pacific. Now, if Mica had showed up in, like, I would believe that for a term like Joraga, the Proto-Oceanic term for fēʻī bananas, right? Because that term gets picked up in that region where there's all of this terminology around fēʻī bananas. Where am I looking? Where's Joseph? There. But Mica doesn't show up until we get to Eastern Polynesia. So that would have to presume, I guess, that there were people there when people were showing up in Eastern Polynesia.
Joseph says, I was thinking maybe one of those supposedly uninhabited islands actually was inhabited.
Yeah, could be. That's even more radical than I would claim. Yeah.
Do you see a similar trend with the divergence, from different words, or with that straight arrow with banana products as well?
What do you mean by banana products?
Like if you were to make some food with a banana or with the leaves or something, do you see a similar divergence, or is it universal?
I don't know. That's a good question, actually. I didn't really get deeper than some of the, I didn't even dive into varietal terms, right? These are just looking at your basic terms, right? So there's your dissertation.
Other questions? My question was about varietal terms, so.
My name's Gabe. I happen to be a banana diversity specialist who has worked extensively in the Pacific, and I have so many thoughts and questions.
Don't you guys know each other?
I don't think so. Hi, Gabe. One about the comment about were there people? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, but there is this interesting little local thing where on Kauai, there's mo'olelo about Menehune, especially this one group that was very banana centric, the Mai'a. And on Kauai, way, way, way up, there are fēʻī. And the fēʻī morphologically, genetically, they haven't been tested yet. Morphologically, they appear to be, to my banana eyes, closer to Micronesian type fēʻī, and less so like Tahitian fēʻī. Other fēʻī that you see around Hawaii are very much like, those are Tahitian style fēʻī. So that's something interesting.
Yeah.
Another thing is studied for bananas in the Cook Islands, which seems to be right around that, maybe switch from, the Mai'a, and they have Mica there. They also have huetū for fēʻī on Rarotonga, but then on Aitutaki, they have Mica and veʻī. And so there's I noticed that there's this really interesting kind of very close, but you call it a fēʻī very different things.
Yeah.
Huetū, I assume, being more from the Punti.
Yeah. But again, getting transferred over to the fēʻī.
Yeah. And then another kind of thing in this sort of fēʻī thing that I've thought about is is the Samoan fēʻī? Like fēʻī, or is that? Because even there, like all bananas, fēʻī and non-fēʻī are fēʻī. They're just different fēʻī.
Yeah, the Samoan's weird. That's an innovation based on faki to pick, right? So that's a completely, it's not, sounds like it should be similar to fēʻī, but it's actually unrelated.
Okay. And
it's
then
related to the word for to pick.
One more question or comment I've heard from some banana curious friends in Pohnpeian, that the karat was like really just like carrot because they're orange as like a super modern English thing. Is that it, or we don't?
I saw Ken online, but I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
It's possible that I think that term's documented in older pre-contact, contact. So
happened to be
similar. But your story about the Micronesian type in Kauai is interesting. I think Wilson would be interested in that, because if this pathway up through the Phoenix Islands is valid, right, you have this idea of moving through kind of margins of Micronesia. It could be the source of the fēʻī in Micronesia and maybe coming from.
As I understand the mo'olelo, I mean, it was in Carlos Andrade's class, the Aqua class, we had to study a place, and I did Wainiha Valley, which was apparently where there was this census in like the 1840s where they document there's some Haole missionaries, there's Hawaiians, and there's some Menehune. Cool, move on. And that there's like,
head count?
Yeah, no, it's like 70 Menehune. Like, and then there's these like mo'olelos saying that there was like Hawaiians, Polynesians were there, and there's these other people there. And we fought them and made them go live up in the mountains. Way, go away, go up in the mountains. That's where you find the fēʻī on Kauai. And they're fēʻī that are like I said, they're morphologically totally different than the common fēʻī that you find around Hawaii, which are like Tahitian style. So I've always been like, I would love to go, sample those bananas genetically and see like, where do they link to? But yeah, there is maybe some scraps of evidence of something interesting there.
We have another question online. Anne says, did the terminologies change maybe with how they were prepared or eaten? Or is it wrong?
I don't know. I've been only looking at this kind of high level, so what's that? It's I mean it makes, I'm trying to think in particular languages. It's the case for Hawaiian. Another good research project.
Any other? There's a couple of words. But
they can go.
We want to come back to banana cake. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. So you might have covered this, but for the Polynesian outliers, do they tend to have reflexes of mica or futi?
Futi.
Futi, okay.
Yeah, you don't see mica at all until you get to East Polynesia.
I have a general question about linguistics, but based on a banana observation in the Pacific. I noticed in the Solomon Islands, where studying bananas there too, like on Makira, they were self-identified as like, we're banana eaters, we love bananas. And their terminology for all the cultivars was highly specific. And they were very like, we have names for everything, and you had a taraka for the fēʻī, which is like the juraga, pretty clearly. Huti for other stuff, which was like, I don't know, that name also shows up in Tanzania, which I was thinking about the westward migration. But then there was other places like on Malaita where they're like, we have bananas, we don't really care as much about them, and we call this whole, like all the same. Is there like an influence or just from other factors, like if certain, whatever they are, groups, tribes just happen to have a preference for something, then they will have more specific or diversified names versus general stuff that they maybe let kind of slide a little bit?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that, because I mean, you have the same thing in East Polynesia, right? The Tahitians going wild, and then Marqesan's like, yeah, we know it, but it's it's not quite the same, right? And so what causes two very almost neighboring peoples to have different amounts of banana enthusiasm, right? Yeah, you see this. Yeah, you see this in Indonesia. You see it in New Guinea as well, like you're describing in Solomon.
Yeah, because in Solomons, it really seemed to be like when we were trying to track names, it was like so much easier in the places that they cared about them. In the places where they didn't, they're just like making up names on the spot. They're like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, some of this could be, I don't know if the case in Solomons, but in some places this could also be, recent language shift and culture shift as well, right? So it's hard to know what's been influenced recently versus, what's a recent change. It might have been more attention to bananas in the past. Yeah.
Question over there.
Taking Gabe's example that he presented a second ago of in the Cook Islands, you have huetū on Rarotonga and fēʻī on Aitutaki in pretty close proximity, but it's same variety, very different names. Do you see the inverse of that in certain places where you have a very similar name, but really distinct varieties across islands?
Yes, but not for fēʻī and Pacific plantains. Those seem to be distinguished everywhere. And so there's no like grouping of those. Yeah. In that Cook Islands example, I think that the fēʻī is a borrowing, probably fairly recent as well.
That's so amazing, Gary. Thank you.
Any other questions for Gary?
And my email is there, and I do have some references. I don't know if there's a place you share these things, but if
Yeah,
not,
you're being recorded.
oh, okay.
We're not telling you that.
Okay.
You decide if you want to share it. Sorry.
So there's there. You can go to the recording, or you could just email.
But that
me.
would be great to share.
Yeah.
This slide. Yeah. Well, thank you, Gary. That was amazing. I learned so much. I had no idea all these things. It's great. And I just want to say, in 2 weeks, we will have another presentation by Dr. Kavika Winter. And his presentation title is The Original Singularity, How Restoring the Human-Nature Relationship Can Lay the Foundation to Build a Global Eco-Civilization, which will surely have bananas. So we will see everybody in 2 weeks. And please take food if there's still some left. Thank you.
It's not an honest screen.
Yeah, pineapple.